So here's a bold statement. I think that what I want to talk to you about is actually a $1 trillion opportunity. So all of you, you're trying to do $100 million companies, or you're trying to make your company like have at least $100 million more in revenue. I want to tell you something that I think actually relates to a legit, straight up legit, $1 trillion opportunity for all of us. And I think we might be doing something that might straight up legitimately give us a path to making a $1 trillion effect if we can figure out how to do it. I love this word competence. If you wound us back to 2011, when I first agreed to run an experiment for the university, which was called Flashpoint, I probably would have said to you, we're going to try to make more startups be more successful. We're going to try to find some way to make it possible for people to be more successful with innovation. We're going to try to accelerate things. Post all that, looking back, I think what we've been paying attention to is something I would rather describe as competence. So anyone have a good definition of competence? It's an obvious thing. It's just the quality of being adequate for a purpose. It means, if you're competent, you can do shit. Not anything, but you can do this. So you'd like to have a competent dentist. That would be a good thing. Let me use competence in a sentence, and tell me if you feel like this is a funny sentence. We invested in that idea because the team has the competence to innovate. Yeah? But a person comes up to you and they say, hey, Sig, I've got this really cool idea. Or Greg, I got this really cool idea inside. Not to pick on people, but these are people that I know have resources to allocate. And they say to you, or any of the angel investors or early stage investors, here's a really good idea. Please give me a whole lot of money. Give me $10 million, because surely my idea and my competence at innovation will turn this $10 million into something good. How many of you feel like that's a funny, is that a good use of the word competence? See, if I said to you, here are the specs for a device I want you to build, and I tell you what the requirements are, and then I bring to you some engineers that have had experience, are they competent to build that device? Probably. That's something we could evaluate in competence. You can spend money with people who are actually competent at things, and it's really hard to spend money with people who are incompetent at things. Investors make this mistake all the time. They think they can figure out where stocks are going to go, or they figure out whether people can actually make something. But I don't think that we're actually competent at it. I don't think the boundary of our competence is understood. And what I want to share with you is some insight into the boundary of our competence at innovation. And I want to show you something that we now think makes it possible for us to become competent at a type of innovation that we're not currently competent at. And by the way, the feeling you have when you give somebody a bunch of money to go innovate competently is this is what they then go do. That's what it feels like if you're the entrepreneur or the innovator in a large company. Is that a familiar feeling to you? Just have a sense of how confusing this whole thing is. It's not even possible to figure out which is the real kid. For the work itself, I think, has some academic merit, but I don't want to necessarily talk to you about the academic parts of it. It won an award, the only award, once a year it's given by the university for outstanding achievement at research innovation. The thing, the sort of the punchline, the $1 trillion opportunity punchline is I'm hoping to, and what we're trying to do with Flashpoint is we're hoping to be able to make available a new set of methods that you can hire as like products, not necessarily people, that you can hire, tools you can hire in order to be able to do and become competent at a type of innovation that is very valuable that we currently are not competent at. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to need to encourage you to let go of some tools that you think work, that we mistakenly think that while we're competent at working with the tools, they don't actually apply in this kind of innovation. So a lot of the tools that are sort of in vogue right now, tools like lean startup, design thinking, agile methodologies, and others, those are very good tools. It just turns out that when you understand innovation in the way we're coming to understand innovation, they apply to certain types of innovation, and they don't apply at all to another set of innovation. And because we don't notice that, or we haven't noticed that before, we're applying tools that are fine and good in one place, to another place where they don't apply at all, and it's, I think it does something worse than not apply. I think it creates the opportunity for folly. So folly is when you decide that you're going to do something that you're not competent to do, but you don't notice that you're not competent to do it, which I think we spend a lot of money on. It turns out that there are three distinct, separable, understandable, separate types of innovation. Two of them are types of innovation for which most of the tools that people think about innovation work for somewhat or even reasonably well. One of them is a type of innovation which those tools don't work for at all because it's a different problem to do that kind of innovation. And so we have to come up with we have to see what that problem is in order to be able to come up with a new set of methods and tools. And that seems to change a lot of things for us. I'm going to start with the easiest one. It's the kind of innovation that we're actually quite good at. It's the innovation that everybody does all the time. It's the innovation of getting better at being yourself. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're, for example, in the railroad business, you can get better at being in the railroad business just by having someone come up to you and say, I've got a diesel engine that will get you better miles per gallon. And immediately you can tell, because you're in the railroad business, what that will mean for the quality of your business. If it's a good idea, you'll just start doing it. If it's not a good idea, you'll know why it's not a good idea and you won't do it. That kind of innovation is an innovation in which it's like you've got a form, it's a bucket, it's a place you can capture value. That's what it means to be in the railroad. And you have a certain amount of value right now, that's the straight line across the middle, and then someone comes along and says, if you start doing it this way, the amount of value goes up. Now, it may not be certain how it goes up, but you get better at being yourself. I like that way of saying it. If someone comes along to the railroad business and says, I can get you better maintenance, or I can get you better financing, it fits your business model, you know how the world works, you can just get better. You get it? That's that kind of innovation where you don't have to change all the assumptions. You don't have to change who you are, you just get better at doing what you already do. We have a name for that, we call it informative, because it actually it creates value in the form that you already have. We do it all the time. For those of you who are students of innovation, if you like the S-curve model of innovation, where you start out and then you jump, you get better and better and better, and then at the top you get scared, and you're afraid everybody's coming to me with like 2% improvements or 1% improvements, but my board and my public markets want me to get 10% improvement. You sort of feel like you're flattening out. Actually, mostly what you're afraid of is you're going to die completely. But at that point, you stop feeling like informative innovation can work, and you start to do something else. Typically, what you do there is you start to notice assumptions that you had built into your model. Like our customers would behave this way, but they're no longer behaving this way. The cost of goods was going to be this, but it's no longer going to be that. There are things that we've always done this way, but maybe we should re-examine how we're doing it. That kind of innovation is different. That's the kind of innovation that would lead you in the railroad business to say, hey, we're shipping stuff all over the place, but why do we have to be on rails? We could, for example, put ourselves in we could ship stuff on airplanes. It turns out moving into the transportation business is a kind of innovation. Not as easy as the kind of innovation of just getting better at being a railroad. It meets all sorts of resistances. The resistances that it meets tend to be because someone comes along and says, hey, all the time our bucket had a right angle there, and we know how to manufacture that right angle, and someone says, yeah, just open it a little bit. Start flying things around in airplanes, and people say things like, well, won't that cut into, like, if they can start shipping fruits by airplanes, what about all the people who are paying us to ship fruits by cold storage cars? And they say, yeah, but don't worry about that, we'll make up money someplace else, and someone says, but won't the railroads go out of business? And then someone else will say, well, you're never going to ship coal in airplanes, so you don't really have to worry about running out of business. Anyway, that's a different conversation. That's an immunity rather than actually working on moving forward and just getting better at yourself. You like the idea of change. It's like if I told you you're a professional tennis player and you can get better by like improving your forehand, or you could go play golf. You're already an athlete. It's really hard to get people to switch. That's what this is like. But you can make a bigger bucket, and we call that transformative. And people do it. The tools like Agile, like customer discovery, like lean startup, they do work in these two types of innovation, in either getting better at being yourself or challenging an assumption and changing. It turns out, though, that there's an entirely different type of innovation. There's an entirely different, and it's invisible to us. I mean, it's literally invisible to us. It must be there, Because before there was a railroad, there wasn't a railroad. But then there was a railroad. Then there was a bucket. There was no bucket, then there was a bucket. And what happened then? What was going on then? And that kind of innovation is more like this. There's all this phenomena in the world, and I can't organize it. Now, if you look carefully, there is a bucket in there. You've got to look really hard to see it. Does anyone see it? That's bullshit. There's no bucket there. But that wouldn't stop someone from coming along. Oh, sorry. Let me say what happens, though, if you can actually do formative innovation. A formative move, so if it's railroads become transportation, a formative move is to notice something that you were never noticing before, but that was always there. In this case, there were people getting on your trains once a quarter to meet each other for meetings. And you hadn't really noticed that, but then when you introduced buses or cars, they were going like once a week. If you could only string wires between them, they could talk 10 times a day. It's hard to string wires between places unless you have right-of-ways like you're the railroad. Here's a formative move. Run wires along the tracks of your railroad, go into the communication business, not threatening to your existing business at all. In fact, it's a much larger business. Williams Communication did this with, they were in the oil business, and they ran wires through pipelines. We call that formative innovation. That's what happens before you have a bucket. Where do you come up with the bucket in the first place? I want to talk to you about formative innovation. Formative innovation is innovating ideas. It's different. The other tools don't apply. And once you see that, you start to ask yourself, what tools would apply? How would you start to do this kind of innovation? And at its heart is the poetry version of the problem. It goes something like this. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there's little we can do to change until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. It's the failing to notice problem that is the problem of formative innovation, but is the problem of trying to find ideas that create forms. If you're in the railroad business, you notice everything. If you're in the railroad business, you can start to notice the assumptions you're making. To move into the communication business, you have to notice that you weren't noticing that there was the use of the airspace above your trains. It's not something that you think of because it's not even something you think that you should think of. You fail to notice that you fail to notice. Anais Nin would say it this way: we don't see things the way they are, we see things the way we are. Or Descartes would say it like this: we describe the world, we do not describe the world we see, we see the world that we can describe. So you put your KPIs in place, you describe what your customers are, you make up a product and look for people that have that product. It stops you from seeing how the world actually is, which stops you from being able to do the innovation that is this kind of idea innovation. And I want to walk you through that a little bit. At the heart of every successful business or every successful innovation in a company or every successful innovation in a university, at the heart is a key idea, super simple idea. It's very hard to see. But once you see it, you can't let it go. And I'm going to tell you what the idea is. The single biggest problem that we have when we're doing innovation or we're trying to do something that's meaningful to people is that people are fundamentally indifferent to us. People are skillfully coping with their lives. That's what they're good at. Their indifference is the killer for us. If we make something and they're indifferent to whether we made it, you got nothing to build on. Everything is in non-indifference. And it's quite interesting or challenging and valuable to start to think clearly about that. It first requires that you notice that there's a three-valued logic or a multi-valued logic going on here. What's the opposite of up? Down? What's the opposite of white? Black? Actually, that's not right. The opposite of up is not up. And there's a lot of directions. The opposite of white isn't black. It's not white. There are a lot of choices for colors. The opposite of indifference is non-indifference. What makes it possible for us to build businesses or build things that people reach for is that we find situations that people find themselves in which not doing something is not okay. Everything is about non-indifference. It's not about love. It's not about hate. It's not about delight. It's not about saving money. It's none of those things. It's strictly about non-indifference. So it's a simple idea. Indifference is killer. Non-indifference is everything. And then it becomes interesting to see, well, why can't I see non-indifference? Why do I think if I make it, people will buy it? Why do they tell me that they're non-indifferent, but then they don't do anything? What's that all about? That force, that non-indifference, is something we've come to call authentic demand. And I want to talk to you about what authentic demand is. Authentic demand isn't, I give it to you and you use it for a while, and then I come back and try to find out how you like it. Authentic demand isn't, you're telling me, wouldn't it be cool if? That's not authentic demand. Authentic demand, what it feels like when you find it is, you say something and people get on airplanes and fly here and demand pricing for products that don't exist. What it feels like is they won't let you leave the room. It feels like if they don't get you to do something, it's not okay. That's what authentic demand feels like, and we think that it's required for an idea to end up being successful. What happens, what makes us not competent at the moment at what we normally call innovation, is that we don't notice that this idea stage or this formative stage or this place where we don't see anything yet, we don't have a bucket, is we mistakenly think that we're in the stage where we have a bucket. And then we start to apply all the tools to build the bucket, only to then discover that there was no bucket. We built the product, as Bev was suggesting, and then nobody bought. That's a place that we don't recognize the limits of our own competence, the edge of our competence. Once you imagine what to build, you can build it. What you don't notice is that you imagine you could build something, but there was going to be indifference to it. And you don't notice that. Or we don't notice that. What gets in the way of our noticing it is what we're calling the waking dream. You've heard people mention the waking dream. I need to talk to you a little bit about that. It gets in the way of our seeing. So here it is. Here's that picture that I asked you whether you saw a bucket, and you said yes, and I said no. So, but if you're an entrepreneur or you don't understand that there's a type of innovation that requires, what do I do when I'm faced with a world that kind of looks like something that I could imagine that there's a bucket in? To notice what happens there and what goes wrong is really, really useful, because you start to see how it is we are acting in a way that's folly, because it's acting in a way that's not tied to our competence. It looks like someone sees that and then sees in there a bucket or something to make, and then gets intent about it, and then pulls together a team that has all the properties that we normally take advantage of. They can do lean startup. They have empathy. They have weapons. They can pose. They have diversity, because now everybody's convinced that they should just build this bucket, this product in the world. The only problem is that that's only how the team thinks it looks, and that's only how the investors think the team looks, when the team is actually looking like this. They're all plugged into a waking dream version of reality in which they're convinced that there will be an authentic demand on the other side of this process that they're going to run, which is actually going to produce something. And of course, the folly, the biggest problem is that the odds of it actually being something for which there's actually non-indifference is extraordinarily low. How would you go about this problem of formative innovation? How would you go, if it's so crucial to be able to understand what a non-indifference is, that is, if it's so necessary to be able to have a successful innovation, that is, if at the heart of it is you have to see people clearly enough in the situations they find themselves in definitely enough, so that were you to show up with something, that not doing something about it would not be okay, that's what you have to look for. How would you go find such a situation? Well, what people normally do is they generate ideas, and they convince each other of those ideas, and then they go down that path that Leonardo DiCaprio went down. No. But can you look for demand? Here's what happens when you go look for demand. This is kind of at the heart of it. You end up feeling a lot like my favorite cartoon character. You're running after something, and you're sure you're going to catch it, and then you find yourself, it can fly and you can't. And you have that kind of chagrined feeling, which your investors have, and your boss has, and your team has. I made it. $23 million later, they don't want it. So what does that feel like? Anyone ever feel that, have that feeling? So what is it, that's when you're feeling like you're wrong. So what does it feel like when you're wrong? Usually there's some macho person that says, I love being wrong. Or someone will finally say, I don't like it. It's a horrible feeling. That horrible feeling is what it feels like when you discover you were wrong. right before you discovered you were wrong, you did feel like something. You were wrong. You felt like something. What did that feel like? Actually, it did feel like something. It felt like being right. The difficulty with searching for authentic demand is that you don't notice that you don't notice that you're wrong. If you noticed that you might be wrong, you would do something about it, because we're very good at doing things that we notice we should do something about. But how do you notice to do something if you don't even notice that you were supposed to notice? This is what happens, for example, when people do this thing that, sort of all the rage, this customer discovery thing, where they go out and interview people to find out what you should make for them. Here's what we've discovered, and it's taken us a long time to understand why, and it's taken a lot of work with psychologists that are experts at this. Here's what happens. If you go into a meeting with a potential customer and ask them to tell you what they want or suggest them a problem, reliably, you will walk out of that meeting feeling like you know whether they would make a good customer. And that's just the way our brains work. You make a whole story out of it. Unfortunately, it's also reliable that you're not correlated with whether or not they'd actually be a good customer. It's the same thing for those of you that are in the business of hiring people. If you interview people for a job, here's what we know. You will reliably walk out of that interview believing that you know whether that person will do a good job. We also know that you're actually uncorrelated with whether or not they can do a good job. And not only that, we know you can't get better at it. It may not matter so much in that setting, because you can always fire the person, or you can try to get them to be better, or you'll get fired. So your company will survive it. Your company cannot survive getting wrong the interview question, will you be a good customer? Because we don't notice that we're wrong, we don't do anything about it. I want to tell you just now 5 principles that are 5 core principles that we've learned in doing this work at Flashpoint. The first is how to think about people, and it's around non-indifference. We have a kind of, I like this way of saying it because you can remember it, but then you have to be careful that it's not exactly right. The first is, here's what makes people reliable as customers. People do what they cannot not do. And I know you want to get rid of the double negative, me too, but you can't. The same reason you can't get rid of the double negative in not white, not white. Turns out not to be white. That's not the same thing as saying people do what they have to do. That's a statement about indifference. Let me just walk you through it for a second. What that says is, if a person is indifferent, you can't rely on them. If a person is in a situation where not doing something is not okay, they might become reliable. That's what that says. You're looking for situations in which not doing something is not okay. It's quite subtle. And the test for it, we have a name for it, we call it the not test. You just learn to start talking in terms of not-nots, and you can get better at it. Here's a concrete example. We have a friend named Jim Balcom. He had a company called the Humminbird Fish Finder Company. When he took it over, they went from about $1 million in sales to $6 million in sales. It's a product you hang off the back of your bass fishing boat, and it helps you find fish when you're going out fishing. When he took it over, $6 million in sales. He tried to do something about it. They estimated the total market for fish finders was $52 million. He went through a series of product innovations using all the tools that you would normally think of. The thing was, he didn't have an informative problem. He didn't have a problem of getting better at being in the fish finding business, and he didn't have a transformative problem. He had a formative problem. 9 product introductions, 9 product failures. Every one was done just the way you'd think. You go ask your customers, what should it do? And they would say, I need something which is a little more accurate in shallow water, or I need something which will tell me the difference between different sizes of fish. I'm just showing. And I need something which will give me a sense of how deep I am so I don't get caught in the bottom. Somebody said, I have 2 boats. I need something which is portable. Every time he would do this, it would require a lot of investment of capital. Then he would have a product launch, and nothing would happen. Finally, a random thing happened for him, but it's something that we now think we can do on a reliable basis, and it seems to change everything. A woman named Sue Simon found herself, who was working for him, found herself at an aisle in a bass fishing shop, and she asked the woman next to her who was about to pull something off the shelf, like, would you tell me why you're buying that fish finder? And the woman told her a story. That I'm going out this weekend with my husband, who likes to drink beer with his friend Bubba, and that's what this is the real name she used. And my husband and Bubba are going to be in the back of the boat, and they're going to be getting drunk, and I hate it, and we're going to go fishing with them, and my girlfriend and I are going to be there, and the 4 kids are going to be driving us crazy on the boat, and I thought if I bought this, it would give the kids something to do to enjoy the time we're out in the boat. So Jim, being the genius that he is, said, damn, I thought I was in the fish finding business. I'm in the entertainment business. So he went home and he managed, because they were like in dire straits, to convince his engineers to get rid of all the knobs, get rid of all the squelch buttons, make a biggest screen they could make it visible in daylight, as much like a TV with multicolors, and they introduced the new Humminbird fish finder. So total market was estimated to be 52 million. They were stuck at 6 million. Next year's sales, $120 million. So here's what I would say to you. What if you think you're in the fish finding business, but you're not in the fish finding business? I mean, how would you know? The name of your company is the Humminbird Fish Finder. The product is called a fish finder. It finds fish. It's sold in the fish finding aisle of the bass fishing place. How do you figure out you're not in the fish finding business? And the answer is actually pretty elegant. You can just use a not method. So let me ask you a question. A person goes out in the boat, not finding fish. Is that not okay? Damn, they do it all the time. Now, maybe if you're in a contest, or you've got bragging rights, then not finding fish is not okay. But for the most part, not finding fish is okay. Let me ask you another question. If you go out in the boat and your kids drive you crazy, not doing something about that, is that not okay? It's a way bigger market. The second principle, and this is a principle I'll just lay on you. We found that one of the things that gets in the way when you do this kind of innovation is the opposite of what you do when you do other kind of innovation. You have to think in terms of negative and not in terms of positive. Instead of thinking about what cool features you would add, it turns out it's much more effective in this space to ask, if I don't do something, is that okay? And then you can ask that question relative to indifference and non-indifference, and it gives you a whole other way to go about product development. You end up asking yourself, what can I not do? Then you don't do that, and that becomes a better product. If you want to see a beautiful example of what that looks like, let me ask you a question. If I don't put buttons on a phone, will it still sell? The big principle is that we're living in a blind spot, that we're not noticing that we're not noticing. And when we're doing this formative innovation, we're not even noticing that we're doing formative innovation. And because we're in a blind spot, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do you do if you're in a blind spot? And the answer to that is you can't just tell people they're in a blind spot. You can't just hand them a tool. You have to provide for people a process that protects them from the blind spot that they're living in. It's a little bit like saying to people, you're not really that good at measuring things with your eyes. That's okay. I'll tell you a better plan. Give them a workshop, put rulers everywhere, put a sign on the wall that says, measure twice, cut once. Then you'll find people actually measuring and when they do their work. You have to create a culture and a process, and that's what we're finding across the street, is that dealing with this blind spot, which causes us to be incompetent at this kind of innovation, requires that we build a process around it. The fourth one is that it's subtle, and it took us a while to understand this. Even when you see something in which your customer's not doing something is not okay, it turns out they still don't do something. So you can see non-indifference, and yet they can't actually do something that meets their non-indifference. And the reason is that we're people. And as people, we have immunities to change. So I'd like to lose some weight. I know certain things I could do to lose weight. And by the way, starting January 1st, I'll probably do them for like 3 weeks. And then I revert. It's not like I'm not smart. I'm smart enough to figure that out. And it's not like I don't have intent. I do. I just can't change. Your customers are the same way. It's possible, though, there are many tools now we have available to us that you can map what causes the psychological immunity. For those of you who care, here's a little bit what it feels like. You're trying to get a grip on this. And as you're doing that, it makes you feel like you're going to lose a grip on something over here. And therefore, you can't get this grip to happen because it causes you to lose a grip over here. Those maps between grips, we can now map them. And the product that gets introduced is something which doesn't cause people to immediately think they're going to lose a grip over here. It allows them to close the grip over here without opening up this grip. You can do that somewhat methodically, we're finding, although it's a lot of work. And that helps you define what your product is. Your product has to be something which if you don't do it, they can't do this grip. And the fifth principle, and this is the one that was most annoying to us, and part of the reason we have to create a space and where you have to create a culture, is that the innovators themselves, the startup people or the people inside an organization, fortunately or unfortunately, they're also people. Which means that they also are immune to change. which means even when they see how to get a grip on something that they could do for customers, they have immunities to the changing in the way that would make it possible. Every organization has immunities. You come in and someone says something to you, or they won't hold a meeting with you. Those are all immune responses which stop organizations from actually being able to do the change, which makes it possible to get a grip on the new customer. So innovators and organizations are immune to change, and this is where it turns out to be incredibly interesting and useful to start thinking about how you can introduce the notion of a culture, which is a set of artificial instincts that people can hold to, which allows them to overcome their own and their organizational immunities to change. This deliberate innovation culture, we now believe that we understand quite a few principles that we never had before. They seem true, they seem research grounded. We have methods and we have process, and part of what we're trying to do is make that open to people. That's us. So I read a wonderful book recently about the Wright brothers. Have you read about the Wright brothers? So the cool thing about the Wright brothers, what they figured out, was they really figured out what the problem was with heavier than air flight. It wasn't that you couldn't get lift. The problem was that you were flying in the wind, and the turbulence was impossible. And the problem was you couldn't stay stable in the turbulence. And they had an idea that if you twist the wings, you might be able to adjust the amount of lift in the wings. But you had to go someplace where you had to learn to ride the wind. So they chose to go to Kitty Hawk. That's Kitty Hawk with a dog showing you that there's wind. They chose to go learn how to ride the wind in a place where there's lots of wind. Everybody else had been trying to figure out how to ride the wind, how to do lift, but they were doing it in the situation of a static wind tunnel, and they weren't making any progress. I think what we're doing at Flashpoint is putting ourselves in a situation where we're fighting right in front of us every day with the biggest kind of wind you can imagine, which is human beings trying to do idea innovation, given that it's very difficult for them to see what they're not noticing, and it's difficult for us to even notice that they're not noticing. And so I think we've made a lot of progress. I can't say that we can fly in figure eights yet, so when that happens, but if you want to understand what I think we're doing over there, or what we think we're doing over there, is we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're forced to skillfully cope with the not noticing that you're not noticing. And I think we're making some significant progress. And ultimately, if you want to be in business, I think this is what you have to do in this third formative phase. See customers for who they can't stop themselves from being. Map their immunities to change so you figure out how to enable them to be that. Adopt a deliberate innovation mindset so that you can change yourself as you need to. And then you get everything, which you simply enable your customers to be more themselves, which is the way they're trying to go anyway. If you want another way of thinking about non-indifference, people are non-indifferent to being themselves. You stop them from being themselves, they find a way to do it. Just find a way to see who they are, let them be that more, and everything changes. Here's the message to take away. When you're doing your innovation, are you getting better at being yourself? Are you trying to change something? Or are you trying to see something which you can't see because it's invisible? And just remember the tools that you have for the second two don't apply in the first. I'll stop there. We think it's a $1 trillion opportunity.